The wind cut along the main street of Arroyo Bend and shoved grit under every door it could find. In the Hart kitchen, the draft smelled like ash and old onions. A tin wind chime hung crooked on the porch, quiet even when the gusts should have rattled it alive. Lena Hart watched it through the wavering window. The chime stayed still. She slid a smooth river stone across her palm and breathed through the tightness in her chest. "Stand up straight," Marla said without turning. She pinched the back of Lena's dress and tugged it down, then adjusted a threadbare shawl until it hid the faint scar at Lena's wrist. The shawl smelled like cedar that had lost the fight. "No limping. If you limp, he thinks you're soft work." "I'm not limping," Lena said. Her knee ached anyway. The fever years ago had left her with weather inside her bones. Marla opened a drawer and pulled out a brush with missing bristles. She set it on the table, then set it again as if placement changed the room. "When he gets here, you keep your eyes where they belong. You say, 'Yes, sir.' You say, 'Thank you.'" "Why is he coming here if it is only a ride?" Lena asked. The words were soft and even like a spoon through cold molasses. Marla looked over, one brow lifted. "Because men of means expect manners. And because Mr. Pike arranged it that way." A wagon creaked to a stop outside. The boards of the porch whined. The wind chime did not move. Boots thumped. Cadwell Pike appeared in the doorway without bothering to knock. He filled the kitchen with ledger ink and cheap cologne. He took off his hat as if he were the courteous sort, then set it on Marla's counter like it had been his counter all along. "Afternoon," he said. His smile was thin and oily. "Got the papers ready. Mr. McCrae is right behind me." Lena's fingers closed around the stone. She pressed her thumb into the worn groove she had made over years. Marla's face changed shape. She turned into her best version of a Sunday widow, polite and severe. "We appreciate your help, Mr. Pike." Cadwell spread papers over the table and uncorked a bottle of ink. He smoothed his mustache with 2 fingers that were always stained. "This is just a simple agreement. Travel expenses, modest compensation for care." He clicked his tongue and peered at Lena as if she were behind glass. "You will be looked after. Coyote Basin is a respectable spread." Bootsteps came again, steady and less eager. A second man paused in the doorway. He was tall and long in the shoulder dust at his cuffs and hatband face tanned into square planes. He took his hat off not to claim the room, but to make space inside it. "Jonah McCrae," Marla said, and offered him that brittle Sunday smile. "Thank you for coming." Jonah's eyes moved once around the kitchen and took a measure of the broken plate on the shelf, the cracked clay jug near the stove, the way the draft made the curtain twitch. Then he looked at Lena. It was a direct look, not hard, not pitying. He could not have told you what color her dress was after only that her hands were tight around something small. "We do not have much," Marla said, voice brisk, "but Lena is neat and quiet. She is no trouble." Cadwell tapped a blank where ink should go. "We will keep this tidy," he said. "No cause for fuss." Before any of that, Jonah said and laid his hat on the chair by the door, "I would like to ask her a thing." Marla's mouth went thin. "We already discussed terms." "I am not here to haggle," Jonah said. His voice was a scratch of gravel that had learned patience. He looked at Lena again. "Do you want to come to my ranch?" Lena opened her mouth and closed it. The room narrowed. The stove popped. The window film shook, and the wind chime outside did not. She cleared her throat. "It is not about what I want," she said finally. "It is about what is needed." Cadwell laughed without sound. "Practical. That will be helpful." Marla shifted to block the light that fell on Lena's shoulder. "She has had poor health," she said, and the word poor came out like a diagnosis. "The fever when she was 17. Dr. Boone said she might not have children. She cannot work a field all day without fainting by sundown, so we are being reasonable." Lena held the stone. It was cool, and the coolness climbed her fingers like a small mercy. Jonah's gaze flicked to Marla, then to Cadwell. He moved closer to the table and read the lines on the paper, not the ink. "You are being paid to let her ride away," he said. He did not make it a question. Marla's face did not flinch. "You will be repaid by her usefulness. She will not set your place on fire. You will have no scandal." He thought about the word usefulness, turned it like a rock, found it unsatisfying. "I do not buy people," he said, which made Cadwell lower his pen a fraction. "Figure of speech," Cadwell said quickly. "It is a stipend. She will be cared for. Everyone benefits." Jonah looked at Lena again. "Have you been told you have a choice?" Marla drew a breath. "She knows what is best." "I asked her," Jonah said. The clock in the other room ticked as if it had been listening from the start. Lena shifted on her feet. The old floorboard complained, and she felt the ghost of a limp where her knee lightened and caught. She did not look down. She kept her eyes on the place where the wind chime would be if the wall were made of air. "I know what happens if I stay," she said. "I do not know what happens if I go." "That is true," Jonah said. "Both parts." Cadwell slid the paper closer, angling it toward Marla. "We do not need speeches," he said with a flat cheer. "We just need signatures." Marla reached for the pen. Jonah moved his hand and set 2 fingers on the page. He did not push it back. He did not grip. He rested there. "Give us a minute," he said. Marla's nostrils thinned. Then she stepped aside, not far, not out of hearing. She rubbed her thumb against the coin in her apron, then fixed the shawl on Lena's shoulders again rougher. "Do not embarrass me," she whispered. Lena followed Jonah out to the porch. The wind stood up and shoved at them both. She tasted dust and the faint metallic tang the air wore when the river ran low. The chime hung still, its tin tongues tangled by a strand of spider silk. "I will not keep you," Jonah said. He kept his hands in view, a courtesy. His eyes were the color of dirt after rain. Tired. Honest. "I can take you to Coyote Basin. You will have a room. You will eat. If you ever want to leave, you leave. That is the whole of it." "Why would you do that?" Lena asked. He squinted toward the road where his team waited under the cottonwoods. "A person is not cargo," he said. "I do not like how Mr. Pike talks around that fact." She listened. The wind pressed the porch boards hard enough to make them complain. A hawk rode a high current above the street, turned once, then slid west over the roofs. Its shadow passed across her hands. Her fingers loosened on the stone. "Do you know what they say in town?" she asked. "I hear a lot of things," he said. "They say I am barren," she said, and the word fell out like a coin that had been hidden under the tongue too long. She did not cry. She felt the shape of the word move through the room and go nowhere. Jonah nodded once, not to agree, but to show he had heard. "They say a lot of things," he repeated. "That you lost your wife," she said. "That one is true," he said. He did not flinch. 3 winters ago. Lena watched his face for the flinch anyway and found only a cord that had been tied and left. She put the stone back in her pocket. She did not want to be seen holding it like a child's charm. He had already seen it, of course. Behind them, Cadwell cleared his throat in the doorway. "Sun is dropping," he sang out. "We ought to beat the evening." Marla came with him, the pen uncapped, her mouth taut with eagerness. "You will thank me," she said to Lena without ceremony. "Not today. One day." Lena opened her mouth to say nothing at all. Jonah shifted his weight. "Whatever story Mr. Pike has written," he said, still in that dry, patient tone, "I am not signing on the truth of it. I am signing for a wagon seat and a hot meal." Cadwell tisked. Words. "You and your papers can wait one more breath," Jonah said, and he looked at Lena, not at the ink. "Do you want to come with me?" The wind found a gap in the porch rail and sang a low thread through it. For an instant, the spider silk let go. The chime gave one soft note that sounded like a throat being cleared. Lena felt the stone in her pocket slick and cool. She looked at her mother's face and saw a wall. She looked at Mr. Pike's paper and saw a trap laid out neat. She looked at the dirt in Jonah McCrae's eyes and saw a place without a lock. She drew a breath, square and slow, and answered. "Yes," Lena said. The word landed quiet as dust. Marla's fingers tightened on the pen. Cadwell Pike grinned and bent to his papers. Jonah nodded once, then lifted his hat and held the door for Lena. On the way out, the wind pushed harder. The tin chime gave a single weak clink and went still again. In the yard, the wagon team pawed at the hard-packed earth. Jonah walked ahead and checked the traces with a habit that looked like prayer. He put a folded blanket on the bench and stepped back so Lena could climb up without his hand at her elbow. Cadwell followed them out and pressed the papers at Jonah. "Sign here," he said. "I will cover travel and supplies," Jonah said, keeping his voice even. "I am not buying anything that breathes." Cadwell's smile thinned. "You like tidy words. Fine, tidy it is." Marla did not say goodbye. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and her face fixed. The pen had left a small black dot on her thumb. Lena could not stop looking at that dot. She pressed the river stone inside her pocket until the edge bit her palm. Then she faced forward and told herself to see the road. They rolled out of Arroyo Bend. The main street tilted away behind them, all porches and shade. Sand lifted and dropped. Cottonwoods made green shade at the river bend, where 10 weeks of dry weather had worn the water as thin as a ribbon. A red-tailed hawk turned lazy circles over the last roof and drifted out toward the flats. The sun sat high and hard. The first hour they did not talk. The wagon creaked. The team snorted. Jonah kept his hands light on the reins and his eyes on the distant ridge. After a while, he took a canteen from under the seat and offered it to her. "Drink," he said. The water tasted like tin and shade. Lena took 2 careful mouthfuls and wiped her lips with the back of her hand. "Thank you." They left the road where it split by a broken fence and cut across a meadow pale with needle grass. Warm wind lifted hair at her temple. She could smell sage and the faint sweet of sun-baked wood. A ridge lifted blue on the horizon. Jonah clicked to the team and they found a steady pace. Near noon they stopped under a pair of cottonwoods that had found water with their long roots. Jonah tied the team, unwrapped a packet of bread and cold beans, and set the bundle between them on the bench. "You should eat," he said without looking at her face. Lena took a small corner of bread. Her hands shook a little. Jonah pretended not to see. He poured coffee from a small blue pot and let it steam into the air so the smell went ahead of it. He handed her the tin cup and kept the handle pointed away so she could take it without touching him. "My mother does not like coffee," Lena said. The sound of it surprised her. "She does not have to drink this one," Jonah said. A coyote yipped far off and another answered. Lena glanced toward the sound. The hawk had followed them this far and now rode a higher current. It became a speck. Shade moved as the day turned. In the long heat of the afternoon they spoke in short pieces. "Where's the ranch? 2 miles after the dry arroyo. How much land? Enough to try and not enough to boast. How many hands? Just me and a neighbor. When the cattle break smart. Did you always live there? Long enough. Did you always live with your mother? Too long." The light changed soft and they stopped early to make a camp because the team had earned that grace. Jonah set a small fire under a stack of gathered twigs and fed it careful. He laid his bedroll near the wheel and carried a second one a little way off for her, close enough for safety and far enough for air. He handed her a tin plate with a slice of salt pork and some hard bread softened in coffee. The pork tasted like smoke and map. The bread went to paste and then to warmth. The night smelled like dust and dry grass. Stars came in a few at first, and then all at once. Lena lay on her side with her knees drawn up and the stone in her palm until the cool of it calmed her breath. She let it fall into the pocket of her skirt and listened to the small, busy sounds inside the dark. Jonah coughed once. The team shifted their weight and snorted. A nightbird called a single note over and over, like a small bell. When sleep came, it came clean and without dreams. They rolled again at first light. The sky was the color of a rinsed bowl. The ridge rose bigger. A wash cut the land in a long ripple. After the wash, the grass changed to coarse brush and the soil shifted from brown to red. A line of cedar posts stood against the horizon like a simple spell to keep trouble out. "Here," Jonah said. Coyote Basin opened easy in front of them. It was not grand and not small. A low house faced east with a porch held up by 4 posts. A corral sat to the side, the rails dark with weather and use. A lean-to shed leaned as if it had earned the right. Farther out, pasture rolled toward a low hill dotted with juniper and rock. There was a faint thread of water under the cottonwoods beyond the barn. The wind came down the basin in a steady old voice. Jonah pulled the team to a stop and let them breathe. "You hungry?" he asked. "Yes," Lena said before she could weigh the word. Hunger felt like honesty. He smiled a little at that, and it softened his whole face. He helped her down by bracing the wheel and letting her set her foot right. Inside the house, the air was cooler. It smelled like old coffee iron pans, wood smoke, saddle oil. The table was scarred. The stove was black with careful work. A shelf held jars with beans and flour, each short a little. A narrow hall led onto 2 rooms. Doors had latches instead of locks. "This room is yours," Jonah said. The window looked out toward the wash and the scatter of cottonwoods. Light came in gentle. A quilt covered the narrow bed. He left space in the dresser that had belonged to someone else once. "There is a bucket by the back door and a dipper on the nail. If you ever want to leave, tell me and I will hitch the team." Lena did not say thank you. She looked at the latch and tried it. It lifted smooth and settled again. That told her enough. She was folding the shawl that had lived over her shoulders since town when her elbow clipped the lantern on the small table by the door. It wobbled once and fell. Glass shattered. The wick hissed and a lick of fire went quick toward the rag rug. Her body reacted before her mind did. She pulled her arms in and turned her face and waited for the heat and the shout that usually came next. Jonah moved in fast, no faster than need. He dropped a damp flour sack over the flame with 2 quick pats, and it died under his hands. The smell turned to hot tin and smoked cloth. He stood there a second to be sure, and then straightened and looked at Lena. "You all right?" he asked. She could not look up. "I broke it." "It is only glass," he said. "Are you burned?" She forced herself to uncurl her hands. "No." "Good," he said. He crouched and began to gather the big pieces of glass into an old coffee tin. He did not sigh. He did not curse. "There is another globe in the shed," he said, and then added, "You did right to get clear." Lena knelt and picked up 2 small shards that had skittered away. She placed them in his palm. For a heartbeat, her fingertips brushed the hard old scars in his skin. He did not move at that touch, and he did not chase it either. He carried the tin outside and came back with a fresh globe. He set it into the brass ring and gave it a gentle turn. He found a handful of flat pebbles by the door and poured them into the lantern base to weight it. They clicked together with a sound that Lena liked. She took the river stone from her pocket and looked at it, then set it in the circle of pebbles. It fit as if the space had been waiting for it. Jonah saw where she put it and did not remark on it. The lantern stood steady. Later the mare in the corral had a different kind of temper. Pepper tossed her head and skittered from the corner and set the rails creaking. Lena had gone to offer a handful of hay and had moved too quick without thinking. Pepper snorted and danced. The sound of her hooves on packed dirt struck hard at the ribs. "She is not mad at you," Jonah said from the gate. "She is telling you she is a live thing." Lena stood still with the hay in her open hand. "I made a wrong move." "You breathed wrong," he said, and he said it like a small joke that made room for comfort. He came to the rail and put his palm flat over Pepper's neck and waited. "Put your hand here," he said. "Feel her breath. Take it with her." Lena lifted her hand slow and laid it where his had been. The mare's skin twitched under her palm. The horse smelled like warm dust and sweet hay. The breath came and went. Lena matched it. Pepper lowered her head 1 inch, then another. The hay was taken with a soft rasp. Jonah stepped back so that the space belonged to the two of them. Work found her. It was in the tub by the pump and in the black skillet and in the seams that had forgotten how to hold. She rinsed beans and felt the cold water bite her wrists. She learned to heat the iron before pouring batter so it would not stick. She scrubbed a pan with sand and liked the sound. She swept the hall and got to know which board always complained. She boiled shirts until steam turned the air sweet and sharp. Every few minutes, not often, but often enough to count, she checked the latch on her door. It lifted and settled without a click. Jonah kept to his chores and added a new one. From a crate in the shed, he took an old wind chime with bent tin tongues on a frayed string. He sat on the porch step with a coil of rawhide and retied the long pieces with patient fingers. He hung the chime from the eave near the kitchen window. When the afternoon breeze came, the tongues touched and gave a thin, bright sound. He brought a small cedar box in from a shelf, where he kept things that did not fit any other place. He turned it in his hands once, and then set it on Lena's table. She opened it, and found a hairpin set with a small turquoise stone, the silver dark with years. "It was my wife's," he said. "I'm giving it to you because you live here now, and I want you to feel that I know it. It is not a chain. It is not an ask." Lena looked at the pin, and then at him. "Thank you," she said. Her voice had a new weight. She slid the pin into her hair and felt the cool of the metal against her scalp. It held better than the bits of string she had been using. A small thing, right and true. Evening brought a bank of dark cloud up from the south. The air shifted from chalk dry to edged wet. The smell changed to earth and lightning. Jonah pulled the wash from the line and set the basin under the porch eave. Lena stood in the doorway and watched the first fat drops hit the yard and make little bursts of dust. The wind chime bumped once and then found a song. Rain moved over the basin in a sheet. It tapped the roof and rattled the cedar. Pepper put her head to the wind and then settled and chewed. Jonah leaned his shoulder against a post and closed his eyes just to listen. Water ran from the porch steps in two thin ropes and found the low spots they had always found. Lena took one slow step out and tipped her face into the rain. Cool spread across her forehead and nose and mouth. She tasted iron and sky. The air lifted the hair at the back of her neck. For a moment the ground under her boots felt like a boat. The porch light tipped a little. She caught the rail with one hand and pressed her other hand to her belly without thinking. She steadied and breathed. The chime kept singing. The smell of wet dust grew sweet. The rain came glad and clean. Rain hardened until it drummed. The yard turned slick, then dark, then full of moving silver. Pepper fretted in the corral, ears pinned and eyes white. Jonah swung the gate and led her by the halter to the barn. Lena kept pace with the lantern in her hand, the new globe throwing a steady circle of gold. Inside the roof rattled tin on nail. The place smelled of wet hay and warm hide. Pepper blew against Jonah's sleeve and stamped. Lena set the lantern high on a hook and stood quiet, palms open. Her skirt hem took the splash from the doorway. Water ticked from the rafters. "Talk to her," Jonah said. "What do I say? Anything true?" Lena reached out until her fingers brushed the mare's neck. The coat was hot and damp. "You are safe," she said. Her voice stayed low. She matched her breath to Pepper's, in slow, out slower. The mare's ears eased one notch, then two. Thunder rolled. The lantern flame shivered and then steadied. Jonah stepped closer, not to crowd, only to lend the shape of another calm thing. A drip fell from the beam and ran cold down Lena's wrist. She flinched and laughed, once soft and surprised, as if the barn had tickled her. "You are doing fine," Jonah said. She turned to answer and found him close. Rain tapped on tin. The horse chewed at nothing and sighed. Jonah reached up and pushed a wet strand of hair behind Lena's ear with the back of his knuckles. His hand smelled like leather and cedar smoke. "Say stop and I stop," he said. She did not say it. She leaned her forehead to his. Heat met heat. The world shrank to breath and rain and the old wood under their boots. His mouth found hers gentle first, then sure. No rush, no hurry. Pepper flicked an ear and settled her weight. The wind chime outside fell quiet under the squall, as if the weather had placed a finger to its lips. They parted without words. Jonah checked the latch on the stall. Lena lowered the lantern and carried it out into the wet. The rain thinned to a straight fall. When they crossed the porch, water ran off the brim of Jonah's hat in threads. Sleep came late. When morning broke, the air felt scrubbed. Lena came to the kitchen with her hair braided and the turquoise pins set tight. Jonah poured coffee, and the scent rose like a hand from the pot. It hit her hard. Her stomach turned. She caught the back of the chair and breathed through it. "You all right?" Jonah asked. "I will step out," she said. She stood on the porch with both hands on the rail until the world steadied. A hawk crossed the basin on a clean line. The wind brought the smell of wet dirt and crushed grass. In her pocket, the river stone warmed to her palm. By noon, the light had turned thin. A rider came from the south at a careful pacecoat flapping once, then lying flat. Dr. Ezra Boone dismounted like a man who had learned to spend his weight twice. He tied up at the post and patted his horse's shoulder. "Morning," he called. "Heard you had a mare with opinions." "Morning," Dr. Jonah said. "She argues with weather." "Most of us do." Dr. Boone's beard had grayed in tidy streaks. His hands were big and quiet. He walked the corral, watched Pepper's step, checked a fetlock, and nodded as if the mare had made a decent point. "She is sound. Weather made of tin will spook any brain that knows it is alive." They went to the shade by the shed. The doctor took off his hat and wiped his brow with a folded handkerchief. He looked at Jonah's face, then past him at the open kitchen door where Lena had paused. His eyes softened the way a lake softens wind. "Afternoon, Miss Hart," he said. Dr. Lena answered. He studied her without staring. The way she held the doorframe with 2 fingers, the pallor that was not fear, the careful breath. He tilted his head and smiled a little, not the loud kind. "You keeping food down?" he asked. "Most of it," she said. "Mornings worse than afternoons." She hesitated and then nodded. He reached in his vest and set a square of peppermint on the rim of the wash basin, not handing it to her, only leaving it where she could reach without debt. "For the road between meals," he said. "Settle the seas." "Thank you." He turned back to Jonah and spoke of hooves and rain rot and the way cedar sheds split in the heat. He kept it simple and true. When he mounted up, he tipped his hat to Lena. "Take the air when you can," he said. "Let the room stand still for you, not the other way around." When he had gone, the quiet felt companionable. Jonah mended a girth strap on the porch with a short needle and thick thread. Lena shelled beans into a tin bowl and listened to their dry knock. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to her room. The small notebook lay in the drawer under the folded shawl. The cover was plain blue cotton, faded where fingers had always touched the corner. She sat on the edge of the bed and counted days. She counted again. The numbers sat in tidy rows and would not bend. She set the book down and pressed her palm to her belly, not firmly, not lightly. Her throat felt tight and empty at once. She stood, went to the window, and lifted the latch. The view was the wash and the cottonwoods and the thin line of water that had not been there last week. Light picked it out and made it a bright stitch across the red soil. She went outside and crossed to the wash. The grass bent around her calves. Under the cottonwoods the air was cooler. Mosquitoes drew an anxious hum and then gave up. She knelt and touched the trickle. It slipped under her fingers and left the skin cooler for a heartbeat. She closed her eyes. Her hand lifted to her belly and stayed there. On the way back, a thin cloud passed over the sun. The wind chime tilted and tapped once. A pair of quail ran from under the juniper with their heads bobbing in a way that made her smile without choosing to. She put the river stone on the porch rail and spread her fingers near it as if heat could go both ways. Inside, she made a pot of broth. The smell sat gentle on the air. She drank from a cup and felt it settle her. Jonah came in from the corral with dust at his knees and a line of sweat at his collar. He washed at the basin and took the cup she offered. "Thank you," he said. He watched her a second, not prodding. "You look different," he said finally, and then he shook his head. "Not different, lighter." "I feel like my bones are listening," she said. "To what?" "Everything." He nodded and did not try to name it. He stepped out to bring in the bedrolls that had aired over the porch rail. Lena wiped the table and set the hairpin on the cedar box so the turquoise caught the last of the light. The room looked honest. Toward evening, she walked to the fence line where the young cedars stood in a rough soldier row. Jonah joined her with a coil of wire over his shoulder. They worked the east post together. His hands held the wire snug while hers turned the nail. The hawk skimmed the field and came up with nothing and kept going. Pepper grazed with her ears at ease. "You ever think you hear the ground talk?" Lena asked. "Only when I am smart," Jonah said. "What does it say?" "It says keep your boots under you," he said, "and listen." They stood at the gate when the sun kissed the far rim of the basin. A little wind came out of the west and lifted the hair at Lena's temple. The chime moved but did not sing. Jonah leaned a hip against the post and crossed his arms. His shirt smelled of sun and iron and wood smoke. He did not reach for her. He did not step away either. Lena took the river stone from her pocket and watched the smooth face go dark as the light fell. She turned it once and felt the familiar groove under her thumb. Her chest ached in a bright way, as if it had learned to make room. A swallow darted through the last gold and drew a curve that felt like a signature. The sound came late. Not thunder, not wind. A wagon on hard ground, slow and sure. It made a dry drumbeat that grew and then settled into a steady roll. Dust lifted at the far fence and made a veil over the road. The team came into view, shoulders working under a shabby harness. The driver sat straight. Cadwell Pike took off his hat, as if tipping to a Sunday, then put it back on as if it had never left his hand. The wagon angled toward the gate. The wind chime stilled. The hawk vanished into the first dark. Cadwell Pike drew the wagon to a stop with a neat jerk of the reins. The team tossed their heads and blew foam. He stood on the board, took off his hat just long enough to comb a hand through his hair, then set it back on like a stamp. "Afternoon," he said. "I come peaceable." Jonah unhooked the gate chain and let it hang without opening. He stood with one hand on the top rail. Lena was at his shoulder, not behind him. The wind settled on the basin like a weight. The tin chime on the porch gave one dull tap and stopped. "You can say your piece from there," Jonah said. Pike smiled with his teeth and still managed not to look friendly. He lifted a folded paper from inside his vest and waggled it with 2 fingers. "Mrs. Hart told me a curious thing," he said. "She says, word out here is the girl is in a certain condition. Now that puts me in a bind. I brokered an arrangement on claims that are no longer true." "What arrangement?" Jonah asked. "A stipend, Mr. McCrae, for a girl who could not provide an heir. You remember the language. Modest compensation for care. That is what we told ourselves so everyone could feel clean." Pike rocked back on his heels. "If she is not barren, the premise fails. A refund is in order, or the article in question must be returned." Lena's mouth went dry at the word article. She touched the river stone in her pocket. It steadied her hand enough to keep it at her side. Jonah's eyes did not change. "You wrote out to tell me that you wrote your papers wrong." "I wrote out to correct a ledger," Pike said, "and to collect what is due Mrs. Hart. She is a mother after all." Lena let a small breath go. Her mother's name felt like a cold wash across the face. She did not speak. Jonah laid his forearms on the rail and leaned easy as if asking the distance to town. "You can leave the Harts out of your talk," he said. "You can leave my gate too." Pike's smile lost its patience. He tried another angle. "I know you are a fair man. I am not prying at your pride. But goods described one way and delivered another is a foul. The town knows it. I know it. You will know it by the end of the week." "Say goods again," Jonah said. Pike laughed a little, as if the moment were less than a moment. "You prefer property? Fine, property then." Jonah reached across the gate before the last word finished its shape. His fist met bone with a sound that was more solid than loud. Pike went back off the board and hit the road dust with both hands spread. The paper sailed up and came down on his chest. One of the horses started and the harness creaked. The air held still for a count. Blood showed at the corner of Pike's mouth, bright and small. Lena did not flinch. She kept her eyes on Pike's face and not on Jonah's hand. The knuckles would be swollen. They always swelled. Pike sat up slow and wiped his mouth with 2 fingers. He looked at the color and then at Jonah like they were both on the same tally sheet. "You just bought yourself trouble." "I only warned you once," Jonah said. He did not lift his voice. He did not repeat the warning. Pike stood with care and adjusted his vest as if to rebuild a man from the outside inward. He tipped his hat to Lena, and the shape of it made a fence. Miss Hart. She stepped closer to the gate and let the shadow of it cut her dress. "I will not go anywhere with you," she said. Her voice was level. "I am not a parcel to pass across a counter. You do not get to write how I live." Pike's eyes flicked to Jonah, then back to her. For a breath, he looked like a boy who had been caught with a hand where it did not belong. Then the old smile came back thinner now. The law can be a stubborn horse, he said, and Mrs. Hart is not gentle when owed. He climbed up onto the wagon and gathered the reins. Dust jumped when the wheels took up their bite. He turned toward the road and did not hurry, as if speed could make him small. At the bend, he stopped and lifted his hand in a lazy wave. "I will give her your regards," he called, and then he was gone behind a haze that made the fence look like it had been drawn in chalk. The basin felt larger with the wagon out of it. The hawk swung low once, as if to check the measure of the place, then rose again. Jonah let the gate chain fall into its notch. He stood quiet and blew a breath out his nose like a horse cooling after a run. "You should not have hit him," Lena said. Her voice held no scold, only air. "He called you property," Jonah said. She nodded. "They always have a word for me." "Let them have it," he said. He flexed his right hand once. The skin over the knuckles looked wrong. He shook his head and let it hang at his side. "You are not theirs." Lena looked toward the porch. The chime hung still. The rain had rinsed the yard clean, but dust had already found the low spots again. A small ant dragged a wing across the step and made progress. "I am not going to hide when they talk," she said. "Good," he said. The word sat plain between them. They ate in silence while the light changed. The stew had gone thick on the stove and wanted salt. Jonah washed the plates and set them upside down on a towel. Lena took the hairpin out and let her braid fall to her shoulder. The turquoise winked on the cedar box. When dark gathered, she went to the porch. The air was warm and high. The stars came early and hung close. Somewhere far off, a dog barked and then changed its mind. Lena stood with both hands on the rail and listened until the basin's quiet became a sound. She set one palm against her belly. It felt like a door that had opened without a hinge squeak. Her throat tightened from the inside. "If you are here," she said under her breath, "I know you." Jonah stepped into the doorway and stayed there so as not to crowd the night. "I am sorry," he said. "For what?" "For having a fist for a mouth." "Sometimes fists talk," she said. She turned her head just enough to catch him at the edge of her sight. "Do not say sorry to me for striking a man who called me a thing." He did not argue. He came to the rail and rested his elbows beside hers. His sleeve brushed her arm once. He let the quiet be the quiet. The chime gave a soft voice, not a song, a small note steady and true. Hoofbeats sounded on the road with the caution of someone who knew where rocks liked to wait. Jonah straightened and went to the gate. Dr. Ezra Boone rode from the dark as if the dark had fashioned him, and then let him go. He dismounted and tied his horse without a look as if the horse would grant it. "Evening," he said. "I was checking a calf up country, saw dust that did not look like a cow made it, thought I would count heads." "All here," Jonah said. "You hungry?" "I will take water," the doctor said. Lena brought a dipper from the bucket. He drank and sighed the way a man does when water hits where it should. He set the dipper back careful. "Miss Hart," he said, and held her with a look that was not heavy and not light. "How are your mornings?" "Rough," she said. "Then better." "Any fever?" "No." He nodded. He had a way of nodding that put the room into order. He glanced at Jonah, then back at Lena. "May I check your pulse?" She offered her wrist. His fingers were cool. He watched her face more than he watched the beat under his hand. After a time, he took a small wooden tube from his coat pocket, polished where it met many coats and many hands. He cleared his throat and put it away again without using it, as if the show of it eased a path. "You keep a steady house," he said to Jonah. "I try," Jonah said. Dr. Boone turned to Lena. "You counted days," he said, not asking. "Yes," she said. Her voice was barely sound. He smiled with the corners of his mouth only. "Then I expect you know." Lena's eyes stung. She did not blink. "Say it," she said. It came out as a whisper the porch took and kept. "Congratulations," Dr. Boone said. "You are carrying." The porch held the words for a second and then pushed them back into the room. Jonah sat down hard on the top step like his legs had mistaken the ground. He put both hands on his knees and let out a breath that had nothing left in it. Then he stood and crossed the 2 steps between them and set his open palm against Lena's belly. He did not press. He did not clutch. He only set his hand there like a man sets a letter where it belongs. Lena laughed once and then the laugh turned. Tears came with no drama and ran where they wanted. She covered Jonah's hand with hers. The pins and needles of shock prickled her scalp and then settled. Somewhere in the yard, a night insect found its note and held it. The chime answered with a thin line of sound, as if agreeing. Dr. Boone put on his hat. "I will stop in 3 days," he said. "You will want rest. Eat what stays. Take the air." "Thank you," Lena said. 2 words all she had. He stepped down mounted and rode into the dark at a pace that gave the night time to close behind him. Inside, Lena sat on the edge of her bed and pressed the heel of her hand to the place under her ribs where breath had stacked up and not moved. Jonah stood in the doorway and waited to be asked in. She looked at him and then down at her hands. They were not shaking. She opened her drawer and took out the plain blue notebook and set it on the quilt. "Do you want me here?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He came and sat on the chair and touched nothing else. The window showed a strip of sky that had learned one more star. The basin had the sound of a big animal sleeping. On the porch, the chime found a slow measure and kept it. The room did not feel small. It felt true. At the gate, the dust where Pike had fallen held the shape of a knee and a hand. A fox crossed the road and paused, nose tilted to catch what was worth catching. The fox slipped between the posts and vanished into the dark brush. The night settled back into itself, and the house breathed like a chest that had finally found its rhythm. Spring came on a slow wheel. The wash kept a thin run of water that flashed when the sun leaned right. Needlegrass softened. Juniper threw tight blueberries. The wind chime found a voice most afternoons and spoke in bright tin. Lena moved slower with her belly round. She learned the pace of shade between door and porch and shed. She stitched a curtain for the kitchen window and hemmed it short so light could hit the table. Pepper watched her from the corral with ears steady and lips full of hay. The hawk had a mate now. They brought dry grass to the fence post near the north line and fitted a nest that looked messy from below and perfect from above. Jonah built a rocking chair from cedar boards he had milled when the river ran higher. He planned each slat until it caught no cloth. He rubbed the arms with oil until the wood drank its fill. In the evenings he sat on the step and carved letters into the back crosspiece with a pocket knife that had learned this family's shape, JM plus LH, a small plus that looked like a stitch. Dr. Ezra Boone rode through on his way to other work. He took his hat off at the door and checked the neat row of jars on the shelf and the careful piles of folded cloth. He looked at Lena's face and listened to the room more than to her words. He left peppermint on the windowsill as if it were part of a prescription and told Jonah to keep wood split and water clean. Then he rode out with a nod that set a day right. Heat came mild. Thunder kept its distance. The basin took a deep breath and held it. The day started plain. Morning broke pale and quiet, a bird calling near the shed. Lena felt the first hard pull low in her belly and set both palms on the table. Her breath shortened, then spread out again. Jonah looked up and saw that her face had gone thin around the eyes. "All right," he said, and the word did not ask a thing. He set more wood in the stove and lit the lamp even though the sun was up. He boiled water and laid clean cloths near the foot of the bed. He sent a neighbor boy to find Dr. Boone and gave him a slice of bread in his hand for the run. The house became a small world. Steam rose. The clock counted. The wind chime kept quiet. Lena leaned on the edge of the bed when the pull came, then sat back and let it pass. Jonah stood where she could see him and matched her breath with his. In slow. Out slower. When she squeezed his hand, there was strength in it that did not ask permission. Dr. Boone arrived with the dust from his ride still on his boots. He washed with cold water, and his hands forgot hurry. He set his bag down open and used almost nothing from it. He spoke in numbers and short truths. Good. Nearly. Now. Lena worked through the long afternoon. The room smelled of hot iron and wet linen and the faint sweetness of soap. The window latch clicked under someone's thumb when a breeze pushed in. Outside, a cloud passed over the sun, then moved on. Inside, time turned to a rope pulled hand over hand. The rope burned and then cooled. Her breath scraped and smoothed. Jonah wiped her forehead with a cloth and pressed his lips to the back of her hand. She heard him pray without words. When the cry came, it was a clean sound. It cut and then laid itself down. Dr. Boone smiled with his mouth and eyes at once, which he did not do often. He wrapped the small body in cloth and set the weight in Jonah's hands. The weight was light and absolute. Jonah looked stunned and certain in the same breath. He turned so Lena could see. The face was red and new, the mouth stubborn, the fists necessary. The baby recognized air, and it made her angry, and then content. Jonah laughed once, and it came apart in the middle, and he did not fix it. He bent and held the bundle where Lena could kiss a damp brow. "Hello," Lena whispered. Her voice rose and fell as if the house had taught it to hold careful. They named her Mira when the light slid to the rim of the basin. The name sat right when spoken. It held without falling through the floorboards. Dr. Boone packed his bag. He checked Jonah's knuckles with a quick look, as if he had noticed the swelling the day before and saved the remark. He put his hat on and gave a last instruction Lena did not hear, because Mira had found her voice again, and wanted the sound of it. He let himself out. The door clicked soft. The horse took the bit quiet. Hoofbeats faded. The wind turned and lifted heat from the roof. The chime stirred and gave a line of notes, like a string pulled by careful fingers. Pepper blew a slow snort and dozed. Two pale heads showed at the hawk's nest for the first time and then dropped back. At dusk, Jonah sat in the chair he had made and learned how to rock without waking a baby who slept. Mira's breath came in small, strong counts against his chest. He hummed something that had no tune, and yet held. Lena watched from the bed with her hair loose and the turquoise pin in her palm. The room smelled like milk and cedar and warm air. Later, when the lamp had been turned down and the window stood open to the cricket noise, Lena set a clean sheet of paper on the table. She dipped the pen in ink and wrote without lifting her hand much. The lines were simple and true. She put the words in the order that let her carry them. She did not make a case. She did not argue a history. Marla, I live at Coyote Basin. I am well. I have a daughter. Her name is Mira. I will not return. I hope you keep food on your table. She signed her name and let the ink rest. She folded the paper once, then tied it with a narrow string. She set it on the windowsill and left the latch open a finger so air could find it. The night air lifted the edge and laid it down again. That was enough for now. She stood by the cradle Jonah had built that afternoon, between panes a simple box with round corners. He had sanded the rails smooth and rubbed the wood with oil until it glowed. She placed the river stone in the corner, where her daughter's hand might find it one day. It tapped the wood once and settled. The basin cooled. Stars came in thick. The chime played a patient tune. Out by the north fence, a fox slipped along the line nose to the ground tail level, a piece of dark that moved like thought. Morning found them on the porch with blankets around shoulders and a small bundle sleeping. Sun took the edge off the chill and then warmed the rail. The hawk lifted into clean air and drew a circle the size of the house. The thread of water in the wash caught the light. Jonah touched Lena's hair and the turquoise pin flashed once. He kissed the child's head and then kissed Lena's hand where it lay on the small blanket. No one spoke much. The chime sang. Pepper stamped once and went back to grass. Inside the chair waited for the next hour that needed it. The house held the sound of 3 people breathing. The basin answered with quiet that knew what it held. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.